This presentation was first provided to the New South Wales Coastal Conference in 2019. It includes comprehensive information about the science of Tugerah Lakes, as well as how it's been managed over the past 12 years through implementation of our Tugerah Lakes Estuary Management Plan. This aerial photo shows Tugerah Lakes from the north, looking over Lake Munmorah in the foreground and Budgewoi Lake and Tugerah Lake in the distance. Tugerah Lakes is located on the New South Wales central coast between Newcastle and Sydney. Here we have a map of the Tugerah Lakes catchment, and all of this land from as far away as Ravensdale, Colnura and Somersby drains down towards the estuary. Tugerah Lakes is a wave-dominated barrier estuary with an intermittently open entrance. Barrier estuaries have naturally narrow, restricted entrances which limit marine flushing, and during long dry spells, the barrier will periodically close. Tugerah Lakes is the 8th largest estuary in New South Wales, having a water surface area of 80 square kilometres and a catchment area roughly 10 times that size. The estuary is shallow and naturally silty, as most estuaries are, and is perched above sea level with an average water level of between 0.2 and 0.3 metres above sea level. Circulation patterns in the estuary are driven by wind as opposed to tides. Major flushing in the estuary occurs through the rivers and creeks, including Spring Creek, Wyong River, Arimba Creek, Tumby Creek and Saltwater Creek, with an average annual flow from the catchment of 193 gigalitres per year. Minor flushing occurs through the entrance channel, with the exchange accounting for less than 1% of the total volume per day. Tides are generally limited to the immediate entrance area. Average retention time for each lake, that is, the amount of time that water stays in each lake before being flushed out, has been calculated at 220 days for Tugerah Lake, 460 days for Budgewoi Lake and 520 days for Lake Munmorah. Many studies over the years have shown that entrance modification would have limited effect on either water quality or flooding. The estuary catchment has changed significantly over the past 80 or so years. From the early days of timber harvesting in the upper catchments, through more recent clearing of the valley floors and floodplains for rural holdings, urban development and industry. The red and blue areas on the map show the extent of urbanisation concentrated really heavily around the estuary floodplain. The loss of natural filters, including wetlands and salt marshes, has taken away the catchment's capacity to self-cleanse. Like removing the kidneys of the estuary, filling and clearing of these important vegetation communities has a major impact on the downstream health. Loss of riparian vegetation has resulted in stream bank erosion throughout the extensive network of streams, creeks and rivers. This has liberated sediment which flows directly to the estuary, affecting the clarity of the water and smothering the aquatic vegetation. Foreshore modification, including reclamation, construction of seawalls and mowing to the edge, all affect nearshore processes and water quality around the lake margins. Modifying the natural dynamics of the entrance by keeping it open has broad-scale effects on ecological process and affects water quality throughout the whole system. More hard surfaces means water can't filter down into the ground, and instead it runs really quickly through channels and drains overland, picking up lots of urban pollutants as it goes. The major pollutants include nutrients, sediment and gross pollutants such as gravel, litter and plastics. Tugerah Lakes has been through 3 phases of ecological health since European settlement. The 1900s and 1960s were characterised by good water quality, clear water, plenty of seagrass and plenty of wrack. Yes, even back then, wrack was a hot topic of conversation. In hindsight, we didn't have a good understanding of nature, or that our actions could have a negative impact on our local area. During this time, the population increased and land clearing was rife, but the impacts hadn't yet started to show. The 1970s and 80s saw a boom in population, with very poor catchment and sewer management practices. It wasn't uncommon for sewer to flow directly into the waterways at that time. This resulted in a sharp decline in health, and at the same time we still didn't really know how the estuary worked or how it should be managed. During the 1980s and 1990s, the population continued to grow, everyone wanted to live near the water, and we were starting to see the long-term impacts of poor catchment management. The lake's restoration project, where the foreshores were reclaimed by dredging up the bottom of the lake and dumping it on the foreshore, then capping that with sand, is one example of applying a solution to a problem we didn't fully understand. Kind of like the cane toad, we're still paying for this poor management decision to this day. A few good outcomes of the era were reticulation of the sewerage, which significantly reduced pollutant loads, and the commencement of several research programs to help understand the estuary as a precursor to better management. The past 2 decades have seen these management plans come to fruition, along with smarter development, water-sensitive urban design, and a move towards more sustainable catchment development. There's still a long way to go, with ever-competing pressures, but the gradual improvement in water quality is evidence that we're on the right track. If we delve into some more detail, we can take a look at where the pollution comes from. These graphics show the loads of the major pollutants, including nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, that come from the catchment. This information is derived from a catchment model, which was validated by field sampling. The model shows that, in general, the largest volumes of pollution come from the rural catchments, just by nature of their size, but the worst offenders are the urban catchments around the fringes of the lake, shown in the darker colours. One other really important aspect is that the type of material matters. If you imagine you might get sticks and leaves and silt coming from the rural catchments, which take time to break down, the urban catchments generate high volumes of fertiliser, chemicals, and highly reactive compounds that are quickly absorbed by algae, resulting in algal blooms or contributing to organic enrichment of the sediment. Looking at how the current conditions compare to pre-settlement conditions, we can see that in all cases the volumes of pollution are higher than what was natural, but in many cases the nutrient and sediment loads are between 150 and 400% of what would occur naturally. Unlike nutrients in our diet, too much is a very bad thing when it comes to waterways. And with all that extra stuff coming into a naturally sensitive and poorly flushed system, it's no wonder we're seeing the system break down. One of the key questions has been to look at where all this material goes when it enters the estuary and what effect the entrance has on moving it all out to sea. Council scientists work with experts from the New South Wales Government to develop a series of models. These included a catchment model, a hydrodynamic model, and an ecological response model. Collectively, these tell us what materials are going into the estuary, where they come from, where they go, how long they hang around, and then most importantly, what effect all this has on the lake ecology. The first graphic shows changes in salinity as a way of describing the general movement of water around the lake and highlights the areas of most and least activity. This is modelled from the 2007 Pasha-Bolka storm, which was a 1 in 10 year flood event for Tugerah Lakes. Inflow from the rivers makes up the majority of input. Some discharge exits at the entrance, but the influence of a strong southerly wind pushes the surface water north. The animation shows that Chittaway Bay, Tugerah Bay, and adjacent to Tugerah Golf Course are relatively sheltered, and water may stay in these bays for some time, making them susceptible to algal blooms if there's an excess of nutrients present. The second animation shows the exchange of water through the entrance channel. The inflow of water is minimal on each tidal cycle and doesn't extend far into the rest of the lake. Lastly, this animation shows the time it takes for the estuary to be flushed by the entrance alone in the absence of catchment inflow. Note the daily time steps ticking over and the limited dilution generated by ocean water coming in. This really highlights how poorly connected and flushed the northern lakes are and how vulnerable they are to catchment pressures. With this information, you would assume that Lake Munmora, being furthest from the entrance, would be in the worst condition. But this is not the case. Because many of its natural wetlands, including those at Tugerah and Elizabeth Bay, are still intact, they provide a natural buffer. It's important to be mindful as well that there's not enough energy in the system to carry all of that stuff down to the entrance. So in essence, what goes into the lake stays in the lake. Prior to the 1960s, the entrance was allowed to naturally close over during periods of low rainfall. When there was rain in the catchment, the lakes would fill up to a point, then spill over, scouring a deep, wide channel through the entrance. This natural fluctuation in water level allowed the lake to self-cleanse, with a lot of the material that was in the lake, be that silt or rack or sludgy sediments, being able to wash up onto the shore. When the water receded, this stuff would be left high and dry, and the lake edge would become clearer. Once a regular program of dredging commenced, these water fluctuations were greatly reduced, and paired with increased loads of pollution coming into the lake, took away this natural self-cleansing mechanism. Studies of the entrance date back to the 1990s. An independent study by Umwelt in 2011 investigated sediment dynamics along the north entrance beach and at the entrance and concluded that council should not construct training walls at the entrance. None of the investigations to date demonstrate that construction of training walls would benefit the lake or North Entrance Beach. In addition, the study did not support high-volume dredging, removal of the berm, or alternative mechanisms to drive the lake entrance to a permanently wide open condition. It went on to say that enhanced wave penetration into the estuary and increased lake water levels now and as sea levels rise Both have significant risks for lake ecology and flooding. Based on a recommendation from this study, in 2011 the New South Wales Government commissioned Cardno to develop a numerical model of the entrance channel and surrounds. In 2013, Cardno were again commissioned by the state to provide objective professional advice. This included 2 additional studies which looked at the morphodynamics of the entrance channel and investigated a range of engineering solutions proposed by the community. The latter study provided costings for a range of proposed options. The first study used the numerical model to evaluate a range of popular management options, including training walls, which are also known as breakwalls or breakwaters. The study concluded that the various training wall options would not increase flood level if spaced at 150 metres or more apart, noting that any closer would have unacceptable negative impacts on flooding. The study also stated that these options would lead to virtually no change in lake water quality and would require that maintenance dredging of the type already undertaken by council continue. Notwithstanding this clear evidence of limited benefit on flood level, flood duration, or water quality, the second 2013 study looked at ways to improve sand retention on north and south entrance beaches. The report went on to cost a range of options, with twin training walls estimated to cost in the order of $46.8 million, again with negligible benefit. The study was the catalyst for the construction of the current groin on the entrance beach to assist with sand accretion over time. The longer-term impacts of this structure on entrance morphodynamics are currently unknown. In 2015, a third Cardno study was prompted by the then Estuary, Floodplain and Coastal Management Committee. The study revisited the model but included deepening the channel, which is currently constrained by a rock shelf at the estuary mouth. The conclusion was that, following deepening, the dredged channels would begin to infill almost immediately from both the upstream and downstream ends, and that comparison of simulations undertaken with or without the training walls showed little difference with regard to water quality and water levels in the lake system. This study did, however, caution that significantly increasing tidal exchange may have additional impacts, including a decrease in lake water levels, exposure of muddy shores around the fringes of the estuary, reduced recreational value and potentially fish catch, reduced estuary navigation and access to jetties and boat ramps, destabilisation of the foundations of the entrance bridge, and permanent changes to the shorelines around Tugerah. Based on observations elsewhere, other foreseeable changes could include loss of seagrass and salt marsh, changes to commercial fish and prawn populations, loss of little tern habitat, migration of the flood tide delta west of the bridge, making this area even shallower, exposure and oxidisation of acid sulphate soils, mangrove ingress into the intertidal zone. In Lake Illawarra, they've seen an 87-fold increase in mangrove area since the training walls were installed, erosion of the entrance seawall along Memorial Park, ongoing shoreline recession and erosion placing infrastructure at risk, bridge instability, again in Lake Illawarra, emergency works to the cost of $2.5 million were required to stabilise Windang Bridge, and less protection from coastal storms and wave impacts in a changing climate.
If we look at how the estuary responds to all the changes I've described, we know that material from the river catchments generally deposits in the lake basins, that's the middle of the lake, and then material from the fringing catchments flows directly into the nearshore zone, having a really significant impact on the ecology of these areas. Wind, not tides, mixes the estuary, and because the lake is shallow, the wind has enough energy to stir the water right down to the bottom, picking up sediment, nutrients and algae and holding them in suspension for a long time. This is why whenever the wind blows, Tugerah Lakes looks brown and dirty. The seagrass has been lost in the middle of the lakes and has been squeezed out to the edges, so primary production is now dominated by algae and phytoplankton. Whilst the contribution of seagrass and macroalgae is now less, it is still really important when you consider seagrasses are 40 to 50 times more efficient at storing carbon than terrestrial forests. And finally, we know that the oceanic exchange is limited, so what goes into the lake stays in the lake, and if we want our lakes to be healthy, we need to make sure clean water is coming in. Seagrass and macroalgae are called primary producers. They are the bottom of the food chain and perform a really important function in stabilising the lake bed, recycling nutrients, producing oxygen, improving water clarity and providing a home to fish and invertebrates. If we take a closer look at what's happening below the surface, and the major energy pathways, we can see that the nutrients come in from the catchment and are quickly taken up by phytoplankton. These guys are then eaten by zooplankton, and the fecal material and little dead bodies fall to the bottom. Bacteria feast on this detritus, sometimes creating rotten egg gas as a byproduct, and cycling energy back up the food chain. Wind waves are the major driver of this recycling process, which is the most significant energy pathway in the estuary. The flow of energy up other pathways, like between salt marsh, fish and birds, is much smaller. The reason Tugerah Lakes looks dirty and brown more often than other estuaries is firstly because it's shallow, and secondly because the seagrass, which covers the bed of the lake, has moved over time. Survey data and anecdotal reports indicate that seagrass has shifted away from the middle zones and has pushed right out towards the edges. Seagrass is a plant, and plants need light to grow. As the amount of dirt coming from the catchments over time increases, the water was cloudier more often, which blocked the light from getting to the seagrass. The seagrass could no longer live in the middle areas, so it retracted into the shallower water, leaving just the shallow muddy bed. Wind waves could then easily stir up the bed sediment, which further exacerbates this problem. This is referred to as a negative feedback loop and can be very difficult to reverse. As the seagrass moved towards the edge, the sandy shores people remember were lost from some places. A further complication is that seagrass now forms a barrier between the nearshore zone and the middle basins, which traps pollution around the edge. We know that seagrass is under immense pressure, but we don't know how much it can tolerate before it disappears completely. This would be catastrophically bad for the estuary. The nearshore changes are shown here. We have some old aerial photos of the foreshore and nearshore zones along Longjetty and Killarney Vale. This was typical of developed foreshores right around the estuary. The early years were characterised by clear sandy shores, in some places but not all, and strong healthy seagrasses in the basin. As time goes by, you can see the macrophytes starting to move towards the shallower water, but the sandy ridges generated by the wind are still visible along the shoreline. Note the gradual enrichment of the basin in 1954, and then by 1974 the seagrass is pushing right into the shallow water. By 1982, the seagrass has moved right into the shallow water, which is the only place left for it to grow. This was a period of time when algal blooms were common and water quality was poor. Keep an eye on the yellow line around the edge. In the final image, you can see where the foreshore was reclaimed and all of the drainage lines that were installed. These drip feed pollutant-laden water into the estuary over time, further enriching the nearshore zone. The seagrass around the edge is thick and long and creates a barrier that traps material from the urban drains in this narrow band, magnifying the impact. We've been tracking the health of the estuary since 2011 using the New South Wales guidelines. The New South Wales MER is the model applied across the whole state to assess estuary health. In Tugerah Lakes, we've added more sites and increased the frequency of sampling to build a clearer long-term picture. We use what are known as pressure and response indicators. Pressure indicators tell you what the system is having to cope with, and response indicators tell you what kind of impact the pressures are having. This is a good way to track the resilience of the estuary and alert you to a system decline. These results are converted to an annual grade, kind of like a school report card, with grades ranging from excellent to poor. The map here shows an average of grades over a 6-year period from 2011 to 2018, with grades between A and C and measurable improvements at some locations. If we compare the grades in Tugerah Lake to other estuaries in New South Wales, you can see in the first segment that Tugerah's A's, B's and C's are not dissimilar to many other estuaries along the New South Wales coast. Moving to the right, we can see the sites we sample in Southern Lake Macquarie and Brisbane Water, with A's common in the well-flushed sites, but C's and D's in more isolated locations. Then, moving further along, we can see the Northern Beaches lagoons and finally the Great Lakes region, again with similar scores to Tugerah Lakes. Managing an estuary requires an adaptive approach. We start with a plan, in this case the Tugerah Lakes Estuary Management Plan. From here we implement the plan. We monitor the system to see what's working and what's not. We evaluate these outcomes, and with an improved understanding, we plan again. To see how this has been put into action for Tugerah Lakes, we began in the 1990s with a new estuary management manual produced by the New South Wales Government. We developed an estuary process study, which was really about the nuts and bolts of how the estuary worked. From here, the estuary management study looked at issues and options, and the estuary management plan identified action plans and priorities. Since 2008, we've been actively implementing the EMP with the support of several federal grants. These have helped us deliver many projects, and it certainly hasn't been a plan that's sat on the shelf. A key component of the EMP was to fill some knowledge gaps, which we've done through partnerships with experts in a range of fields. This new information has been embedded in our management to date and will be incorporated into our new coastal management program. This map is live on Council's website and includes all of the grant-funded projects that have been part of the implementation phase. The map includes stormwater improvements, salt marsh rehabilitation, bush regeneration, water quality monitoring sites, stream bank rehabilitation and recreational upgrades. We've delivered these in partnership with a range of different organisations. From the web-based map, you can click on each icon to bring up more detail. Community engagement and education is a high priority for Council. Ensuring a healthy future for our estuary is everybody's responsibility. With over 150,000 people living in the catchment, if everyone can make some small change, we can really turn things around. Our estuary education programs always include a call to action, something tangible that people can do to make a difference. These messages are delivered in a range of ways through online content, iBooks, printed material, eco-tours, report cards, workshops and school-based programs. Each year we celebrate our beautiful waterways as part of the Lakes Festival. A great way to tell the story of the estuary and reach a broad audience is through film. We have a series of videos and short films about Tugerah Lakes, which we screen in local cinemas. There are plenty of things we can all do in our daily lives to help. Keeping chemicals and fertiliser use to a minimum, preventing soil from washing down the drain, binning your waste, or installing a rainwater tank or rain garden can help. You can install permeable paving and use natural ground covers instead of concrete and bitumen. You can let the native plants grow, especially on the riverbanks and foreshores. Maintaining your view is one thing, but wouldn't you rather look at a clean and healthy waterway? And finally, if you have a free weekend, why not join Landcare or Waterwatch? We are continuing to deliver actions within the estuary management plan with the support of ongoing grant funding. We will be working with the New South Wales Government's expert panel and the community to deliver a new coastal management program. We will be launching a brand new website and publishing our annual waterway report cards. Once the new coastal management program is in place, we'll be working hard to deliver actions contained within the plan and reporting back to the community on the outcomes. If you'd like to find out more about Tugerah Lakes, you can visit our website.